Let's try to formalize this problem. I'm going to consider the task of speech recognition or machine translation. And I have a sentence in French which says une personne intelligente. And this has two possible translations, which is a person smart or a smart person. Now, which of these translations is better? And how could a computer model this? What do we think? Let's start with the easy one. Which translation is better? Who thinks the first one? Okay, good. Second one? Excellent. You all have delicate knowledge of English grammar. Smart person is better. Now, how would you use a computer to model this? Any thoughts? So let's say one idea is to say that I have a lookup table, which gives me, for every word in the first sentence, the equivalent translated word in the target language. So I'd have something like which gives me a, and then personne, which gives me person, and then intelligent, which gives me intelligent. That's one idea. Anything wrong with this idea?
Sometimes there is no correspondence between the source and target language.
Okay. Do you mean sometimes there's no correspondence, Jima?
When?
Can you give me an example of when there wouldn't be correspondence?
Okay, in another language. I think for example, if we consider Chinese language, we can't find a correspondence between, because it's based on voice and noise, you know.
Okay. So I think what Shima is saying is that sometimes there might be words in one language which just does not have a direct, translation in another, either because the combination doesn't exist or because it's not just single word that needs translation, but perhaps combinations of word that needs translation. Hamza?
Yeah, so the grammar between the two languages can also be different. And so the structure of a sentence, the order of clauses, right? Like temporal clause should be first or something like that, like for Chinese, for example, or and it's flexible for French. And so doing one-to-one might break the grammar structure of the destination language.
Absolutely. And the example is already on the slide, right? If we do one-to-one translation, assuming even that the mapping exists, then une personne intelligente will become a person intelligent, which I think none of you put your hand up for. Was not the correct grammar in the target language. Was there another hand, Barca?
Oh yeah, I was just about to say there's not a one-to-one mapping between the grammars of every language. So
okay.
Yeah.
So what about non-one-to-one mappings? Let's say that I give you a lookup table that not only has one-to-one translations, but also combinations of words and translations. Would that be useful? Or is that also challenging?
I think that's also challenging, because every time we put up a source word, we just have to go through all the words of output.
So, and what's wrong with that?
I mean, the computational complexity will increase for each
right.
source
Okay.
to target.
So if I have a language that has some number of words, let's say V words in its vocabulary, then I would have a lookup table of size V if I'm doing one-to-one. But then what is my lookup table size if I'm doing like pairs of translations of 2 words? It'd be V squared. Right? So my lookup table would just scale exponentially, and that's not very nice. And then lookup would just be intractable. Right. Okay. Cool. So we may have a system that is good at translating individual words, but not so good at translating sequence of words. And at the same time, even that individual word translator might break the structure and not be so useful. So before we go on and build our translation model, let's actually first try to understand language probabilistically. And you all correctly said that the second sentence is more likely. So let's see how we can formalize that. So let's define a language model as a probabilistic model that assigns probabilities to sequences S of words W1 to WT. Let's say I have a sequence or a sentence denoted by S as Amir went to class. So what is a reasonable approach to evaluate the probability of this sentence? Because we have sequences of words and given the word ordering, we can model the probability of sequences as the product of the likelihood of every word occurring given its previous words. Right? So what I'm saying is the probability of this sentence, or the likelihood of this sentence, which I can write in its complete joint form, factorizes into the product of a number of conditional distributions because we have a sequence of words. Right? The way we form sentences, the next word is based on everything that came before it, in a sense. Right? That's the intuition here. So I write P of W1 to WT as P of W1 times P of W2 times the condition on W1, etc., until the last word conditioned on everything that came before it. And I can write that compactly as this product down. This is using the chain rule of conditional probability. So now to answer which one of these two sentences of potential translation targets is more likely, I'd say a person smart is probability of the word A, probability of the word person conditioned on the word A, and then probability of smart conditioned on a person. And ultimately, what you'd probably conclude is that based on our understanding of English, the one on the bottom row is more likely overall. And so this is a more likely sentence to occur in English. Now, whether that's the actual target sentence is a different question, but just stand alone between these two sentences, the second one is more likely. Was there a hand a minute ago? Maybe I addressed your question. Shima?
Yeah, I want to know that here we shouldn't assume that there is the probabilities are independent. Yeah. And
Which probabilities are you referring to?
I'm looking at the multiplication between probabilities,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking of independence between the probability of each words, and I think we don't have this assumption here. Yeah.
So certainly in probably to more accurately model language, we can't assume independence between each one of the conditional probabilities. This formulation is literally just saying that the way that we construct sentences or sequences of words is that we put one word after the next. And our choice of the next word is just conditioned on everything that came before it. So that's the assumption that gives rise to this factorization. More complicated models like transformers go beyond that assumption, though. Okay, so what is the task of language modeling then? The task of language modeling is the task of learning a language model that assigns high probabilities to well-formed sentences. And well-formed sentences are sentences where every next word in the sequence has a reasonable likelihood. And that's why also the task of language modeling is sometimes referred to as next word prediction models. There was another hand.
Yeah, I mean, like, just for the composition, like this products, you're absolutely allowed to use it even without independence. Like, what you're not allowed to do is to take the products of the like marginals, like products of W1 times probability of W1 times probability of W2 times probability of all the way to WT. But here they're conditioned, and you have like this chain of conditioning, so it's fine. Like you're allowed to do that. Now the question is more about, I think that you would want to ask is which conditioning, like which conditioning graph do you want to use? And I think that's an issue of causality, right? I mean, like.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. So what we're trying to measure is ultimately the likelihood of a sequence of words, which is the joint probability over all of those independent words, or sorry, over all of those words. And Hamza is absolutely right. This line that we have here is only one possible decomposition. And or factorization. We've chosen this factorization based on the assumption that every word is generated based on everything that came before it. So this is absolutely allowed. But then if we had written it as something like this, what does this assume? This assumes that all the words are independent. And that breaks our intuition. So we're not going to write. So this one here is not something we're going to write. But the other factorization is allowable based on the assumption that words are generated or conditioned on everything that came before them. Cool? Excellent. Okay, now something on this slide might, ick some of you, and that is that this decomposition says that it's a product of the likelihood of every word up to word t conditioned on every single word that came before it. Let's say I'm generating a long thesis or a book, and somewhere in chapter 5, I'm still conditioning on the very first word in the book. That doesn't seem like it's a tractable solution, right? So what we do is we additionally make an assumption called the nth order Markov assumption. And the nth order Markov assumption basically says that this P of S that I had from before, the likelihood of my sequence, which was defined as a joint likelihood or the joint probability, which I then assumed the following factorization on, instead of going all the way from W1 until WT minus 1, I'm going to limit the window and only consider the last n minus 1 words. Right, so what does this mean? This means that the tth word is generated based only on the n minus 1 words preceding it. And we make this assumption, of course, because of tractability and relevance. Yes, so now you can assume a moving window, something like that gets put on every next word that we're trying to measure the likelihood for. Now, we also call each combination of these, let's say, n words, an n-gram. So an n-gram is a sequence of n words. This sentence that you see on the slide itself is a sequence of words. So is this line that we see on the slide. All of these are sequences of words that we might have available to us in a corpus whose probabilities or whose structures would then guide the probabilities that we learn for our n-gram model. We'll define that in a second. So we can have unigram models where n is equal to 1, and we only are trying to measure the marginal probability of every word, and we take the product of that. As you can imagine, it's probably not so powerful. Or we can have bigram, sequences of 2 words, or trigram, sequences of 3 words, etc. There's always going to be a trade-off between how well we're able to estimate those probabilities and then how well the product of those conditional probabilities actually help us model language, right? So it's always going to be a trade-off of our tractability and also accuracy of modeling language. Now, n-gram models use what are known as conditional probability tables, such as the one that you see on the top right-hand side, which tell us the probability of sequences of words. What does this mean? This means that, for instance, based on the table here, I want the probability that my third word in the sequence is cat, based on the preceding words being the and fat. And if I have a conditional probability table like the one on the right-hand side, then I can look at the sequence of the fat and then find cat that follows it. And for this particular data set and the numbers that I've arbitrarily made up, the probability is 0.21. Now, a couple terminologies here for you. We call everything preceding the nth word the context. So what we have here. And of course, the next word is just a target word for which we're trying to understand the probability. So in this example, the fat cat, what type of n-gram is this? Is it a unigram or bigram or?
Bigram.
A bigram, okay. Who thinks it's a bigram? Okay. Who thinks it's a trigram? Who thinks it's a quadgram? That's a thing. Okay. This is a trigram model because we conditioned the likelihood of a particular target word on the n-1 words preceding it. So in this case, it would be a trigram model. How many columns does this table have? I mean, it has 3 on the slide, but overall, how many columns does this table have?
It can have infinite columns, I think.
Can have infinite columns. Let's say I'm only trying to model the English language. How many columns would it have?
As many as there are possible words in English language.
Okay, so Guru is saying that the number of columns is equal to the size of my vocabulary, which I called V. How many rows does it have?
Also V?
Also V, okay, Parsa.
Would it be V squared?
Why would it be V squared?
Because it's all the combination of two words in the English language, like all the, I guess, pairs.
Right, so assuming that all possible combinations exists, right? Even if they don't exist, that's fine. We'll just have a row of zeros. But all possible combinations over all possible pairs of words over a vocabulary size V would give us V squared number of rows. And how are these numbers obtained? Does anyone know? How do I get these? I mean, I made them up here, but how would I actually get these numbers? So the way that we do it is, as most cases within machine learning, we assume that we have some training data set. Our training data set, for instance, can be Wikipedia, right? And then Wikipedia has like millions of documents, each of them with different lengths, blah, blah, blah. If I'm doing a trigram estimation of, if I'm trying to estimate the likelihoods of trigrams within the documents of Wikipedia, I go through and I find all combinations of 3 words. What's my next step then? I'm going to say, I see the fat cat, 50,000 times within all of Wikipedia. But I see a lot of the fat other things as well within Wikipedia. I might have a million, like the fat dog and the fat whatever. And I'm just going to take the ratio of all the times that I see the fat cat over all the times I see the fat anything. This is otherwise known as the Bayes rule. So I say the probability or the likelihood of cat following the context the and fat is the joint probability of the fat cat sequence being found. I said that was like 50,000 times over the fat anything. And that gives me one of the values within the table. And then I repeat this process over all the size of the table that I have. So really, n-gram models, again, just starting from the top, n-gram models are based on conditional probability tables where the values in the conditional probability tables are counted from within a corpus of some data set that I have, and I fill in those numbers. And we all have, perhaps, I shouldn't make a statement like this, cognitive scientists would shoot me. But if we're trying to model language probabilistically and formally define it, then we assume there exists some understanding of these likelihoods, and we take the product, and then that gives us one sentence being more likely than another. Let's take a brief detour and try to appreciate for a second why it's important to have n-grams that are larger than unigrams. So this is an n-gram model based on this is 4 n-gram models based on a corpus of data which we call not Wikipedia but Shakespeare. And if I try to learn probabilities of just unigrams and then generate text based on that, I get the first line, which could be a sentence like, to him swallowed confess here both, which of save on trail for RA. I can't even read this, right? But as you go through and as you try to learn longer sequences and longer n-grams and then generate text based on those probabilities, then you get something like the 4-gram model on the bottom row. King Henry, what? I will go seek the traitor Gloucester. Exeunt some of the watch, certainly Shakespeare, but now it actually, has some structure to it, has maybe some meaning to it, right? So longer n-grams are important. Of course, it's not just Shakespeare. You can look at it within other domains like Wall Street Journal. And for 1 gram, you might get months the Mai, an issue of year 4 and new exchange, like ridiculous text. But then for already trigrams, they also point to $99.6 billion from 200. Sounds boring, but it makes sense, right? So already with trigrams, we get so much more structure, but then at the same time, it's going to become more difficult to actually do the estimation. So an n-gram model, we saw an example here for the trigram case. It was the likelihood of the third word conditioned on everything preceding it, which was the ratio of 2 counts within the corpus that we have. The dot here just means that anything can go. And for general n-grams, it's probably straightforward. And you all understand that we are now going up to t words. Sorry, we're looking at the likelihood of the tth word conditioned on the n-1 words preceding it. So these counts are obtained empirically from a training corpus of text. And luckily, the denominator always guarantees that this is a valid probability that sums up over 1 when you look at all possible combinations of the numerator. Let's try to give an example of this to help our intuition. I'm giving you now a training data with, or a training corpus with 3 samples, 3 sentences. One of them is I am Sam, second one is Sam I am, and the third one is I do not like green eggs and ham. And I've given you the estimator for the likelihood values in the conditional probability tables as the maximum likelihood estimator on the right-hand side, the counts, the ratio of the counts. Now, how would I measure some of the bigram probabilities within this data set? For instance, for the likelihood of am preceded by I look at here, I say, okay, there's one am that follows I, another am that follows I, and an I that does not get followed by an am. So the likelihood is 2 over 3. Let's each take a moment to try to compute the other bigram probabilities. So what is the likelihood of P of Sam preceded by M?
1/3.
1/3. Any other thoughts? Okay, so in this case, we have 1 m and 2 m. So our denominator would be 2. And Sam is only following m once, so it's 1/2. Now, I would accept also if you say that m is present in ham and that's not followed, but let's assume we're talking about whole words and not part words. Okay? Ignore that for a second. What about probability of do preceded by I?
One by three.
And I want to draw your attention to the fact that I is occurring 3 times. And now the sum of 2 over 3 and 1 over 3 is 1, right? We said that the denominator is going to make it so that these sum up to valid probabilities. And what about the last one, I preceded by am?
Zero,
right? We just don't have that within this. Okay, so far I've mentioned at least a couple of times then that to model text realistically, we'd prefer to have a high value of n in our n-gram probabilities. But then the problem with that was that the number of entries that we need within the conditional probability table is going to be very, very large. We said we have v or size vocabulary columns and v squared rows for a trigram. If you extend that for a general n-gram, that's v to the power of n minus 1 number of rows. Multiply rows and columns together, you ultimately get v to the power of n different cells within your conditional probability table whose values you have to estimate. How did we estimate each of the values in the conditional probability tables? We said we're going to count. We're going to count the numerator, how many times that particular sequence occurs within the corpus, over how many times the context occurs within the corpus. And as you start to increase the size n of your n-gram, you're going to get so many more, just exponentially more v to the power of n, again, cells that you need to estimate. So what's happening here? We just need a lot of data to actually do a proper estimation. And so, yes, the number of entries in the conditional property table is exponential in the context length. And with exponential possible context combinations, we run into a problem called data sparsity. And what that means is that most of the n-grams don't actually appear in the corpus. And when they don't appear, that means the counts are going to be really small. And when the counts are really small, we're going to be very poor in our estimation. So that's the trade-off. On the one hand, we want larger n, but on the other hand, we just can't have larger n. Right? Or at least not based on the counting approach that we're looking at.